All right, let's go to the next slide. I don't really have a lot of slides. This is really all I have, right? We have the placeholder and then we have the agenda. The rest of it is practical. So the main agenda for today is we're going to talk about the mini challenge itself a bit. Very briefly, we're not going to go into specific details or these sort of things. For these, actually, if one of my colleagues can correct me, I think you'll have already received these videos, or we're going to send you these videos, where in a previous session, me and our CEO, Giannis, talked about what is ZoomCharts, what we do here, how to register, and everything. So today, I'm just going to go through the main points to keep in mind and pay attention to. That's the first thing. And of course, we're going to talk about why are we even here, right? What's the connection between ZoomCharts and these challenges for the community? And then we're going to go through the data set itself, talk about a few of the things that you should pay attention to, think about whilst developing the report and these sort of things, and also talk about some of the customizability of the drill down visuals, just to kind of get you started there. Of course, we're going to give you a couple of resources as well, where all of this information is displayed in a nicely formatted way. Whether you love to read documentations, everybody loves them, right? We all love to read 300 pages of technical documentation. Or you're going to have links also to things like video guides and these sort of things, where you can just leisurely watch them and see what's new and how to do certain things. All right, hope it sounds good. All right, so first of all, what is ZoomCharts? So ZoomCharts is a software, it's a custom visual development company. In reality, we're a data visualization development company. In this specific aspect, we're developing custom visuals for Power BI. Currently, we do have 10 custom visuals available. And if I quickly open up the website, because I want to quickly show you that. Let's see it up. Gonna change the share or my screen. There we go. Let's go for that one. There we go. So on the custom visual side, we do have, like I said, 10 different custom visuals. They range from very traditional ones like the donuts, line charts, column charts, area charts, to more, let's say, exotic or more interesting ones, which are things like graph visuals, network charts, waterfall visuals, map visuals, and these sort of things. So we try to kind of accommodate best of both worlds, the more common ones and the more complex ones. And the main reason why we're joining these sessions and these workshops actually is because we want to be able to help you guys achieve more with visualizations in general. So, and the reason why we're doing this is, I think you can all agree with me. So now the current situation is that Power BI is still relatively new to a certain extent, right? A lot of companies are still in the process of implementing it, or actually just first ones to implement it for the first time when in whatever timeline it is. And what happens now is a lot of you can create relatively simple reports, and that is enough for current situation. Because still, it's an improvement on what you were building and using previously. But from our experience, what we can tell you is the time before additional changes are required, or the time between you have to enhance these reports, is actually relatively small, and it's becoming smaller and smaller by the day, by the month, by the year. So what happens is we're trying to, through these sessions, actually give you as much information as possible, not only on how to build better reports, but also how to use these advanced visuals, not only from us, but from other developers as well, on how to enhance the reports so that your end user can make data-driven decisions a lot faster, and they can actually do this by navigating and exploring the data through the charts directly. We're going to showcase this whilst talking about the report building process itself. But that is the main agenda. So we know that the process of developing reports is rapidly changing, right? We know that previously just regular simple reports with just few line charts, few bar charts, and maybe a table were completely sufficient. But nowadays, people are more kind of gravitating towards the actual navigation part of it. So they want to interact with the visuals. They want to interact with every single item that is on the table there. So they want to get information as fast as possible and as detailed as possible. So that's what we're trying to do through these sessions. And at the very end of things, we just want to make sure that you have all the necessary knowledge to get from point A to point B as fast as possible. Now, from my personal experience, I can tell you that I started off with Power BI a little bit over 5 years ago. And when I started off, I did the same thing that a lot of you are doing through these challenges, right? I started to participate in a lot of these challenges just to kind of get information on how to build reports, what visuals to use, what tips and tricks can I get from this. And I can tell you one thing, which is usually kind of counterintuitive to certain people, but understandable to other ones. And that is that everyone is going to struggle. It doesn't matter how much experience you have with either Power BI or different BI tools, there is going to be a certain amount of struggle. And that is because there's a lot of things happening on the Power BI itself. So there are new features coming in, you need to adapt to it, you need to understand what they do and what they offer. Now, the second part of it is visuals. There's built-in visuals and there's custom visuals. The built-in visuals are changing, the custom visuals are changing. And trust me, even after 5 years and specifically focusing on custom visuals, which is what I do on my everyday job, I still have a little bit of struggle certain times when I try out a new visual. Even though I've seen hundreds of different approaches for certain things, still going through the formatting tabs, you're still sometimes looking at the charts and thinking like, all right, how the hell am I supposed to do this or that? And that is the reason why we're hosting these workshops. We just want to help you get from point A to point B a lot faster. And one other thing that I wanted to mention is if any of you do have any questions, and I mean any, right? It doesn't matter if it's a very simple question or a more complex question, I'll post them all in the Q&A section. I'm going to try to respond to all of them. If not, there's also actually, I'm going to type in an email, webinars@zoomcharts.com. So that is an email you can also use to send in your questions afterwards. So if there's something that you forgot to ask during the session, or there's something you just, comes to your mind afterwards, use that email address, send us the questions, and we'll go through them and come back to you. All right. We talked about these things. Now, the most important ones, the challenge itself, where to get the data and everything. So if you go to our website right here at the top menu, you're going to see a section called Challenges. Open that up. And on the right-hand side, Onyx Data, October Challenge. Click on Learn More, and that's going to open up the specific challenge for this data set that we're talking about today. You can see right here we can register, but few things I just wanted to note down here is please just go through the whole description. The main reason why I want you to do this is so you can understand the full process. So what is the mini challenge? How do you participate? So for example, there has to be at least 2 ZoomCharts visuals used in report to participate in our mini challenge. If you don't want to participate in the mini challenge, you don't have to use our visuals. This is specifically for our mini challenge. There's also judging criteria and everything to basically give you as much information as possible. Like I said, if there is anything missing or you still have any additional questions, just reach out and we'll get back to you. Now, as far as dataset, right here, download the dataset. You can click on it. And if you scroll down, I think it was at the very bottom. Apologies for the mega scroll, but hey, it had to be done. No, I missed it. Where was it? Submit, register, complete this form, LinkedIn, regulation, participate. Yeah, my apologies. Click on participate, enter in your full name. That's my first and last name. Yeah, everybody got that? Most important thing about the session. Click on download, and that's going to give you the Excel file. There's things happening in the background. Meanwhile, what I'm going to be doing is just simply opening up the same Excel file that you're going to be downloading. And the Excel file is actually going to have two sheets. One of them is going to be the data dictionary, which is great. And the other one is the data set itself. Now, why I say that the data dictionary is great is because if we just have the original data source without any explanations what these columns represent, they might be interpreted in different ways, right? So for example, first thing that you can see here is, not the first thing, but if you go, let's say expand this one in Spotify charts, right? So this can be interpreted in multiple ways. You could read this and say, oh, okay, that represents the position that the song is, for example, in the chart. In reality, if we go to the data dictionary, so in Spotify charts, find it, presence and rank of the song in Spotify charts. So that essentially identifies that the song is in a number of charts and that it has a rank within it. So these things you just need to double check, make sure you do understand them, and make your reports based on that available information. Now, about the dataset itself, we can see that we have a track name, we have an artist name, and then we have a lot of descriptional information, like how many artists were involved in the song creation itself, the release year, the month, and the day, the ranks in playlists and charts and these sort of things, number of streams, different streaming platforms like Spotify, Apple, Deezer, Shazam, these sort of things. What's the average, the BPM per minute, beats per minute, what's the key, what's the mode, and so forth. Now, on a first glance, I don't really know if anything is needed on top of that. So what I do with the dataset is pretty simple. I open up a new Power BI report and I connect to the Excel file itself. I'm going to close the Excel because otherwise my desktop is getting synchronized and you're going to get this error message. If somebody gets it, don't worry. It's just because the folder where you're trying to reach is getting essentially synced with the OneDrive. So just close it down and try to open the file again. Now here we have two different worksheets. And in this case, I'm actually taking both of them. I usually take both of them. If you have a dictionary, I load it into the query. The main reason why I do this is whilst I'm developing the report, I can use that data and understand if any of the columns are misinterpreted, or if I just don't understand it, I go back to the data dictionary. The other reason why I have it there is because I can actually afterwards use that to also, for example, create some sort of a data dictionary within the report. So have, for example, a separate table or a separate page within the report, which is just the definitions used within the report. If you also have some complex calculations that you're doing, giving the definitions for them and explaining them to the user, like how it's being calculated and what's the main purpose of it, can help the usability of the report tremendously. So these are just a couple of things that I can mention here. Now, if we go through the data, one of the things that I usually recommend as well in the Power Query, and for those of you who have been to the previous session already know this, is to have these little column qualifiers. So you can see, for example, how much of a percentage of the values here are valid, how many throw out an error, how many of them are empty. And in order to showcase these, all you need to do is open up the view up here in the top ribbon and enable this column quality. You can, of course, also play around with everything else that's here, but I think that's, at least for me, that is the most important one I usually have on, and the rest of them I used whenever it's needed. But again, personal preferences all the way. So that goes there. Now, what else we have here? The track name, the artist count, and so forth. So we see that we have release year, month, and day. Okay, that could actually be used to create a date. Perfect. We see the number of charts, and we actually see that there's some errors in the streams column. And one of the things that I usually recommend you to do here is don't just blindly click on remove errors, because what that does is physically removes that row with the errors, right? So what you do instead is, for example, this is what I do. I right click on a column, I click on keep errors. So that filters out the rows with the errors. So in this case, there's just one row. And then I click on the column, the cell itself. So if you click on the name error, and this is one of the things I remember when I started to work with Power BI, I was hella confused here. So if you click on error, it actually opens up that as a step. And in order to get back to the table, you need to delete that step from the query. So instead of that, what I actually do is just, if you click on the cell, that also gives you the same message, the same window that would show up if you would just click on the name error. So when in this case, what I can actually see is that instead of having the number of streams, this has the information regarding some properties of the song. So you can see there's BPM, and just to double check, let's see, maybe there's some additional information being thrown into those columns. So I scroll a little bit forward and I find the BPM, and I see BPM is 10, key is A, mode is major. So all the data is actually already present. It's just this specific row which gives me the error. All right, so what I do, I delete that step of keep errors. And this is one, let's say, one step where you can decide what to do with it. You can, of course, remove it completely from the data set. And then just, if the song doesn't show up, you have a reason for that, saying that I didn't have enough sufficient information. The other thing that I can do here is, sure, I do not have the amount of streams, but I could replace it, for example, because basically the error is being thrown because there's textual information where numerical information is supposed to be. So I could replace that with, for example, something like a 0, just a qualified value, which is going to be represented in the column. That way, I still keep that song in the total amount. So for example, if I'm looking at things like total amount of songs in the data set and these sort of things, that's going to allow me to see that +1, right? Because I'm not missing this song. But at the end of the day, it's your decision based on what is the requirement for the report. In this one, I don't really have specific guidelines. So what I'm going to do is, for the sake of it, replace the value that has errors with just a single 0, meaning that I still have it in the data set, but it's definitely not going to be one of the top streamed songs, well, because it has 0 streams, right? So it's one of those tricky things where you have to play around and think about it. All right, so we did that. Once we load it in here, I don't think I need to do anything else. Let's quickly go through the columns. There is actually one thing I just remembered. So one thing that I usually recommend to is pay attention to the data types of the columns. So you have text, you have numbers, you have different formats of numbers. And usually ABC123 means that Power BI wasn't able to specifically determine the type of data that's within a column. And that's because it usually has a combination of text, symbols, special characters, and so forth. So we can see here, for example, the encoding didn't work properly, so some of it gets scribbled up. So in these cases, if you check the data source itself and you see, okay, it actually has some numbers, it has some textual values, but in reality, the track name cannot be anything else besides text in most of the cases, right? So I'm just going to force this one to be a text just to not mess with different data formats and different data types. It's always better to determine a specific data type for a column rather than just to keep it on a general, which was that ABC123. So I converted this one, click on close and apply. Waiting for the changes to go through. There we go. And right here, we also have the data dictionary. Remember, I told you about it. And it might be confusing for some users to see it here because there's actually no actual data to use here. So what you can always do is go to the table view. It used to be called data view. Now it's called table view. And you can actually hide this. You can either right click and hide in report view, or you can actually just close the eye right here. So if you click on it, it's hidden. And if you go back to the report view, you can see only one data set's here. But if you still want to check what were the values, you can go back to the table view and it's right here. So this allows you just to have it at the back of the hand if it's needed to go back and double check, okay, the column name is this, what does it indicate? Once you're completely done with it and you don't think that this is going to be useful, you can always remove it. But if it's something that the users can take and basically get advantage from, why not keep it for them to explore further? All right. So first thing I want to do here is we looked at the values that we had here. And remember I said we have the year, month, and day. Currently, we don't have a date, which means that I wouldn't really be able to do any time-based calculations or put on a timeline visual. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually create a date column. And for that one, I'm creating a new column. So right-clicking on the data source, choosing new column. That gives me the DAX input. So I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. And I'm going to say that this is the release date. And the formula is pretty simple. We use the function date, and you can see we need 3 variables, year, month, day, which is perfect because we have all of those in our data set. So we just reference here. Next variable is going to be the month. And then we also reference the day. There we go. That gives us a date field. And the main reason why I wanted to have it is so I can do something with an actual timeline. And I can play around with the hierarchies that are built in within Microsoft if you are using time intelligence. That is year, quarter, month, and day. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to make a timeline visual. So for the timeline visual, you actually need a hierarchy in order to create this. So I'm going to take this one and put it around here at the bottom. So that's going to be my time driver. And within it, you see we have a date hierarchy and then date value. The date hierarchy determines all the granularity levels. The date is an actual date field which you use to combine the dates with the hierarchy. Simple terms, use date hierarchy here and use the same field unless you need to specify it otherwise. Use the same date right here. Then afterwards I need to add some series. So series are the numerical values that I want to plot on the visual. And in this case, we can actually play around with two values that I was thinking of whilst looking at the data set. We could go for something like BPM, so beats per minute. And the reason why I want to go with this is I just want to see how the average beats per minute line is fluctuating between the years. Is there any specific amount of beats that are, let's say like that. Is the trend going upwards or downwards? That's the one thing that I want to understand. So summing up BPM, I think you're going to agree with me, absolutely makes no sense whatsoever. So what we're doing here is actually using the average. You can see now that's the average BPM line. All right, cool. We still have a lot of different BPMs. So what I want to add on top of it is a threshold. I want to see the line that goes throughout the whole chart showing me the absolute average of the visible time span. So I go into the formatting options, open up thresholds. Ooh, I need a license. Of course I need a license. So I'm just doing this step right here. And I'm going to add a custom theme. That step is not necessary for you. It's just me for convenience purposes. All right, so I added a theme file right here. Now, once I added the theme file, I don't have those pop-up messages for the license, but what I wanted to do here is add the threshold. So I'm going to add a threshold, which is going to be a line, but it's not going to be a constant. It's actually going to be an average and based on series 1. So here you choose based on which series you're drawing the line. The series are determined by the values that you input in them. So just a quick connection there. So average of series 1. I'm also going to make it a little bit more prominent. So I'm going to increase the width, maybe too extensive. Let's say 2. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Line opacity, we could actually decrease the transparency, increase the opacity. So I'm going to increase to 80% so it's a little bit easier to notice it. And then we're also going to be adding a label. Now, the reason why I want to add a label is if I don't add it, well, I think you can agree with me, this is just a random line. User has no idea what it represents or what it means. So adding a label is crucial. We have a text plus value. Right here is the value, and I'm going to say that this is the average BPM. There we go. We can always play around with font sizes and everything, but for now, let's just keep it clean and simple. We added the average BPM. Cool. What else we could do here is we could theoretically also enable conditional formatting. And the conditional formatting would allow me to see, for example, which years have surpassed the average of the actual visible time span or which ones are below it. So if we go to series 1 configuration, scroll down, And right here, we can enable conditional formatting. And you can see here, we are using solid H color mode. We're referencing this series, and the function that's determining up and down is the average. So now everything that's below, we can actually increase the size of it. And what's good about the threshold right here, you can actually look at it. As soon as I change the chart, see, the threshold always follows you, and you're always referencing the average for that specific time period that you're interested in. Let's say I'm interested in the years from 2010 to 2019. That is the average beats per minute on, in this year, I think it's half a year basis. So you can always play around with these things and try to figure out which one suits you the most. Let's just go back to the top view. Perfect. Now, what else I wanted to do here is I actually wanted to also add some information in the tooltips. So for now, you can see the tooltip says the year, the time period, and that it's an average of BPM. What I also want to have here is, let's say, some additional information as to let's say, the count of songs. So for example, if I scroll down, tooltip content, I'm going to find track name, because that identifies the song itself. We're not going to keep it at first, because that's just going to give me one name. We're actually going for a distinct count. That shows me the number of unique songs in each of the period. We could, of course, also go for the count. That would give me the total count of songs. But always remember, think about the logic behind it, right? Do the numbers and everything are, let's say like that, are the numbers and everything calculated based on the unique values? Or are they being generated based on all the possible values that you have there? So it's just something to keep in mind there. Now, if we have it here, one other thing that I wanted to quickly show is if you go to series configuration and enable this multi-select aggregation, what the feature does is pretty simple. Let's say I zoom in closer to the 2000s and I select two particular years. You can see in the tooltip I have average of BPM and I have two counts, one for each of the periods. But the measure itself, well, the value itself gives me just an average value. So enabling this multi-select aggregation allows me to also define some other functions that I want the visual to call out. And what I want in this case is, let's say I actually want to see the minimum and the maximum in the time period. So for example, if I select a larger amount of years, you can see that the count, which is part of the tooltip, actually shows me the individual values, so for each of the years. But the value that I had now has these abbreviations in front of it saying average, minimum, and maximum. So that allows me to understand sort of like the value range in between the chart is moving. Okay, so we added that one, and that's going to be our timeline. What else can we add here? Let's go for something like a column chart. So let's go for, since we have a little bit of vertical space here, let's decrease the size of this one and create a combo bar chart. You can always resize it afterwards. I'm just giving it enough room to actually showcase something. So in this one, we're going to be doing, what could we do? We could go for something like artist name and track name. And the value itself could be the number of streams. So this allows us to understand what is going to be the top list of the performers and their songs. And one thing that I wanted to do here is actually, it's one of the perks of being in the product team, right? You have the latest versions, but when you're building and testing new features, some of them don't fully work. So what I'm doing is switching this timeline to the one that's in the app source. So you can see that everything I use here is available to you as well. It's not something, hidden from you. All these things are available. And one thing I wanted to actually, no, I'm not going to enable it yet. I'm going to show you the difference, and then we're going to look at the settings. So this one shows me the artist, and if I click on one of the artists, it shows me the songs itself. And you can see this is the behavior of the timeline. What essentially the timeline does is it allows you to have two different variations. One of them allows you to showcase, for example, how much of the original data is actually applicable to this state. And the other option is that it dynamically adjusts based on the available data. So right here, this is the default behavior. Now, if we go to the chart itself, open up the x-axis, scroll down a bit, and the setting that we're looking for is this one, dynamic all data. If I enable this one, and I select the same thing that I did previously, artist name The Weeknd, you can see a bit of a difference, right? So instead of cutting everything off that wasn't relevant, I actually took what's relevant and expanded upon it just so I have more kind of space and it's easier to see the chart. Instead of having those narrow columns, I have normal columns which I can easily go through and understand, have values on top of, and these sort of things. Now, that gives me that sort of idea. So this is by number of streams. Okay. What else? We could go for something like a donut chart. Because the one thing that I want to do today is focus on what we usually call the core visuals, right? Those are the visuals that you have in 90% of the reports. Columns, lines, areas, and these sort of things. And then when we have the other session, I'm going to be focusing on other visuals which are not that common. So this is a lot more easier for when you're starting off. The other session is going to be a little bit more advanced, but it doesn't mean that you cannot follow through and still make visuals. It's not rocket science. It's just practice, practice, practice. So for donut chart, what we're going to be doing is, let's actually see. Go for the data dictionary. I want to quickly check one thing. So we have a key for the song, and we had mode. I just want to double check what the mode is. Yeah, right here. I don't know. I'm partially blind. Yeah, sure. It happens, right? So key of the song and the mode of the song, whether it's a major or a minor. So in this one, we're actually going to be putting mode and key, which is going to be the second layer. And then the value is going to be also number of streams. Now there's one thing that I also mentioned in one of the previous workshops, and I'm going to mention it 100 times. Remember, colors have a meaning, right? We can all agree on that. So, which means that having your colors all around the place is not going to be efficient, and it's going to confuse your users at the very end of the day. Right now, we just have a few of them. But if I, for example, open up the major units, you can see, okay, there's actually more slices underneath it. If I go into minor, there's also multiple colors. And if I start to throw these colors all around, so for example, there's red here, I could, for example, conditionally color this one, and then there's red and green here. So the user kind of gets confused, right? So one of the things that we can do is we can go to fill color settings. And the one that I'm interested in right here is the base fill color. So that allows me to select one singular color, which is going to be considered sort of like the master color or the base, right? Master, base, see the reference? So it's right here. And what happens afterwards is as soon as I open it up, you can see it using the same color, but just a different shade of it. And one thing that I always emphasize on when doing this is make sure that the base color that you choose isn't too light. Because since you're going down in the light version of it, if I put the base color to, let's say, this one, which is already very kind of translucent color, you can kind of see where this is starting to become a little bit cumbersome, right? The further I go, the lighter the version becomes. So always try to choose a color which has a bit of a contrast in it. So, and the reason why I'm doing this is because it's going to be easier for the user to understand that both of these things are using the same value as a representation. Okay, so we have these things. Now, if we look at the data set again, like I said, we're talking about streams in a lot of these places. BPM is just something that caught my eye and I wanted to see the trend of it. But at the same time, if I think about it, I also want to have the ability to see the timeline based on streams. So to see, for example, which years have the highest amount of streams, for which artist, which songs, and these sort of things. But having another timeline in the space that we have allocated to it, well, we don't have infinite amount of space. Sure, we could, for example, increase the page size to, let's say, 1080 by 1920, which would be 1080p. But still, we don't have an infinite amount of space. We can't just magically create more space, right? We always have to think about the end user, because otherwise what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating reports where basically the user has to navigate like this, right? With the scroll bars. So he has to move left, right, up, down, and it's not ideal. Especially if you're new to Power BI, that's just going to confuse you and, make it feel like, yeah, I don't really want to have this here. So this is just going to allow you to make it much more translucent. All right. Quickly noticing in the chat, Rukiat, you asked if this is the time series or the timeline. This is the timeline visual. All right, what else we have here? Like I said, we're talking about the streams a lot at the time. So one thing that I actually want to do is I want to be able to create a visual switch for the end user that allows him to basically switch between this chart, which shows the BPM, and a chart which showcases the amount of streams. To do that, it's actually quite simple. Once you know how to do it, right? Everything's simple. But it is actually quite simple. So what I want to do is just make sure that both of the charts are going to be the same size. That's first. So I'm taking the original chart and creating a copy of it. I'm moving it in front of the donut because I'm going to move it afterwards. So it's right here. Perfect. Then I'm disabling the thresholds because average amount of streams, well, it does make sense, but I don't really want to have it. And I'm going to disable the conditional formatting. Again, going back to the colors, right? Average BPM is not relevant anymore. It's going to be the number of streams. There we go. And also, we could keep the count of tracks. All right. One thing that I'm also going to add is a quick reset button. The reason why I want to add the reset button in the toolbars is because that's going to allow me to quickly, for example, let's see it right here. If I drill down into one of these, you can see it gives me a reset, and it allows me to get back to the initial state regardless of what state I was previously in. So it's just a nice, quick, and easy way to get through things. Let's see. Don't have any other filters applied. Oh, actually, we might have the donut chart. No, nothing's there. Okay. And we don't have any filters on the page. No, perfect. So what I want to do here is we have one chart, we have the other chart. So now I'm going to open up the bookmark and selection panels. I'm going to create two bookmarks, rename one of them to be BPM, and the other one is going to be number of streams. These two bookmarks. What I also want to do between them is I want to make sure that I'm only switching two visuals. Why this is important is because switching between them allows me to not affect everything else on the report page. So I enable the selected visuals rather than all visuals. And I also don't want the visuals to pass out any filters. I'm sorry, not the visuals, but the bookmarks. So I disable the data. And I do this for both of them. So selected visuals, no data, selected visual. Perfect. And what I'm going to be doing now is basically renaming the visuals, because otherwise earliest release date, they're the same, right? Almost the same. So I click on it, see this is this visual. So it's number of streams by release date, average BPM by release date. Okay. Now I hide the number of streams, for example, select both of the visuals. The main reason I want it, remember, I have selected visuals enabled. So I select both of them. The one that's visible is BPM, hence I update the BPM bookmark I created. I do the reverse, so I hide the BPM and enable the number of streams, and I update the streams. And I just quickly double check. So that shows the streams, that shows the BPM. Cool. Last thing I want to do, showcase both of them again, and just position them exactly on top of another, not moved both of them, but do this. And I can see that I actually have resized the visual accidentally. There we go. And now it seems that if a user wants to interact with them, you can see it basically just looks like it's switching between two versions of the visual. There is a little bit of a deviation from the position, that's on me, but it's the main idea that I wanted to quickly do here. Now, having bookmarks is cool and all, but I want to be able to have this simply available for the end user. And for that purpose, we can actually go into Insert, Buttons, Navigator, and Bookmark Navigator. So that gives me this nice looking navigator. The reason why I'm doing this is I'm not using two different buttons is because it allows me to automate a lot of stuff. So I'm going to go here and say style. Selected one is going to be with black font color and white fill. But everything else, so default is going to be with white font color and black background. So this means it's unselected. The white one means it's selected. So now I just quickly go through the rest of the states just to kind of ease up the process. On press, yeah, sure, let's do it. I mean, we already started, right? So might as well finish it. There we go. Then I'm going to resize the buttons. Okay. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so it's just a little bit closer to the buttons and I can take a look at them a little bit closer. All right. If I look at them, I want to kind of play around with them. So you can go to Shape and change them to rounded tab, both top, this one. You can see it kind of makes them look a lot more like tabs for the visual. And now the last thing I want to do is just position it so it gets closer to the side. So now, if I go back, I allow the user to, like I said, switch between these two. Streams unavailable, BPMs available. Simple as that, doesn't take away a lot of space, and I added another functionality which the users can just adapt and enhance upon afterwards when we're creating other reports. All right, what else? Let's see, based on the space that we have available, we could do something like this. Since we're talking about the songs, then which is more broad term, right? The artist and the song. Then you go into song details, which is based on the major and the minor key mode and the key itself. And then what we could add actually is, remember we had these properties for the song. How suitable for dancing, song's musical content, perceived energy levels, and so forth. So we're gonna add a card visual, the new card visual. And we can add just a bunch of different information. BPM is already here, but just in case we want to add it right here as well, let's go for BPM. Danceability, energy, instrumentalness, acousticness, speechness, balance. I'll be honest, guys, I'm not that much into music. I don't know what that means. But it's a property that's supposed to be there, so all good. Now, we created this, right? Mwah, looks just perfect. Keep it there, users will be amazed. No, I'm kidding. We need to adapt it. What we're gonna do is play around with the layout. And since we have a lot of different cards, we can't really go only vertically or horizontally. So the orientation we're choosing is gonna be a grid. And the grid itself is gonna be, I want 2 columns. And how many rows? How many settings we had? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7. Okay, let's create a value that can be divided by 2, 8, and that goes into 4 rows. Sorry, columns 2, rows 4. Right? Let's see if we can add anything really else here. Liveness. Yay! Perfect. 8 KPIs. Looks a lot better just. And then we can play around with the callout values. So decrease that to, for example, something like 16, just so you have the full name. What else? Label. Could be something like 8. Or fine, 8 is going to be a little bit too small. Put it at 10, but just remove this sum of everything, right? Just keep BPM, for example, danceability, and so forth, so you have enough room there to showcase the full name. And showing again a sum doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So what we could do here is the approach of showing the minimum or maximum values. So for example, based on all the available data sources, this is the max BPM, the max liveliness, and these sort of things, or you can go for averages. And the reason why I want to go for averages is because since we have an opportunity to choose an artist and then afterwards a song, it gives me a direct path of narrowing down the filters. So if I choose an artist, sorry, if I go back here, there we go. If we go back here to the artist, I can choose any one of them, and that gives me the average properties for this specific artist. And if I choose one song, well, the average is going to be the only value that's going to be there, right? There's only a singular value there. So that allows me to see, well, this one actually didn't have any data available. Well, at least we caught something, right? Not all data sets are going to be perfect, guys. Trust me, it's the way of the nature. So we added this one here. The BPMs probably go for the same one. Also average. Adjust all the names. Just remove the average of for everything, or use some abbreviations if it's necessary, just so you can actually read it. Now, another thing that you can notice here is we have the percentage in the header of the value card itself, but the value is in decimal numbers. If you wanted to convert this and showcase an actual decimal, you could use a DAX formula for it, or if you go back to the Power Query, let's find one of them just to kind of showcase the idea. Let's find right here, danceability. You choose a column, go to the transform section in the top ribbon, choose standard, so number column formation transformations, standard, and divide. Divide it by 100, and then convert this decimal number into data type percentage. So if I apply these changes, so danceability, okay, and let's see where it was, right here. So we don't have enough room now to showcase it. So what we could also do here is play around with, for example, the paddings. Okay, that didn't give me enough room. The callout value, let's see, decrease the number. Is it really just 1? Sensibility 1 or 0%. That doesn't make any sense. See, remember what I told you in the beginning. Everyone struggles. Even I struggle. So I don't think that the query changes went through. If I change this into a percent, there we go. The last change didn't go through. So that's now in a percentage. But this is, again, based on your preferences, whether you want to have this in the namings of things, or you want to have the actual value with a percentage, or these sort of things. It's really up to you to deliver the wanted result. Let's have here yearly level. There we go. So we have these properties now for the song. Close a couple of these so we have just a little bit more room for the report itself. What else we could do? We could theoretically, of course, decrease the size of this, play around with this, the spacings and everything. Also decrease this. And then have another top line with few other KPIs. We could have, for example, the total amount of streams, the number of other artists, and remember we have these playlists and charts. So we could theoretically kind of split it up into two. So have a section for the artists, have a section for the playlist. There's a bunch of different things that we can do here actually. But then again, don't want to spoil everything. Hence the challenge, so you can play around with the data and build something of your own. The most important thing is I just wanted to play around with these things right here. Last thing I wanted to quickly show here is if you start to use the donut chart, there is actually one fantastic feature that we have here. And that is, for example, if I completely change the chart, I want to have as many values as possible. Because we all know, right? The donut chart is kind of a tricky one. You either love it or you hate it. There's really no in between. But if you have a lot of these values, one thing that you can do is our interactive others slice. So here, if you disable, this isn't god-awful chart. But if you enable it, you can define the number of slices that you want to showcase. So for example, I want to see only the top 5. And the user can still select them and filter them out. If I click on one of them, I go down to the next level showing the song that's underneath it. If I, for example, go back, reset the whole timeline, and go back to the weekend, which we had here, you can see there's more songs underneath it. And if a user wants to, he can actually click on the others and open up the next 5. So you're essentially working with blocks of 5. Top 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, and so forth. So that gives a lot of also customizability and flexibility to the end user instead of in your shoulders. But just remember, right? Don't use this for situations where you have just hundreds of different variations. Use this where you have still a relatively definable size of categories and everything like that. All right, we definitely didn't go through everything we can absolutely done here, but like I said, it's part of the challenge. I want to see what you guys can create in it. I want to see your ideas, your questions, your thought process here, because when I was starting off, looking through these challenges helped me to also develop things in a little bit more creative way. And the main reason why I participated in the challenge is because I wanted to see how other people are visualizing the same thing that I have. Because what typically happens in your workplace is you focus on one type of data in a lot of these cases, right? So for example, if I'm in finance, it's going to be financial data all the way through. That limits you to a certain view of data visualization. You're always thinking about it from that perspective of finance. All right. So what we're going to do is jump to the Q&A section and go through those questions. Q&A. So first one, Hanya. Let's see. Broadcast comment from. Can you please come again? I missed the date call. Sure. So what we did here is we created, right-clicked on the table, new column. We need to give the column a name. So we made it a new date. In this case, I'm going to name it new date. And we used date function. And we had all 3 variables. So we're using year, so released year, month, released month, and day, release day. Once I finish it up, that gives me a full date that I can use within timeline visuals. Let me know if that's what you were asking for. If not, my apologies. All right, let's go with this one. Just going through all of them. So, which is, all right, Rukia, which is perfect to view value and danceability over time. Which one should be used, time series or timeline chart? I'd say if you are going to stick only with regular values, you're not going to do any additional aggregations or calculations, you can stick with the time series, because the main difference between the timeline and the time series is that time series does not fully support DAX measures, whereas the timeline visual does. The timeline has a few other options, of course, available on top of it because it can calculate measures. But if you're just using regular columns and you don't need specific calculations, you can use the time series. For this case, since we're going into conditional formatting and these sort of things, I would recommend the timeline. So, next one. Can I use ZoomCharts visuals in the challenge where ZoomCharts is not included? Let me read it again. Can I use ZoomCharts visuals in challenge where ZoomCharts is not included? Oh, I know. So you mean, for example, if you want to participate in a challenge where we're not a partner of, can you still use our visuals and use the developer's license? Is that what you mean? Just wanted to clarify. If so, then yeah, absolutely. You can get the developer's license by going to our website. So let me just quickly open it up. So if we go back to the challenges, you click on register, use your first name, last name, email address, and everything and so forth. I'm just going to use my login for ZoomCharts. And once you're going to register and log in, I can register to one specific event because that's the one that I selected. And here you can see I can activate the developer's license. You agree to the terms and conditions, go through them, and we generate a user and a password which has access to all those visuals. The only thing you have to take a note of, this developer license can be used to create reports for ZoomCharts mini challenge or for personal training purposes. The only thing that we're forbidding with this one is commercial use. You cannot use this for your company for internal reports or sell the reports that you create with these visuals, that sort of stuff. Other than that, you're good to go. You can create and make reports for other challenges and submit them. All right. Anything else, guys? Anything you wanted me to go through? If not, then I guess from my side, the question is, if you could just write in the chat. Well, what I typically ask the attendees is, so was the session actually interesting? And did you learn something useful? Because learning something new is very simple, right? I could say an absurd fact that, I don't know, my hair is going to be pink tomorrow. Cool. Was it useful? Probably not. I mean, mainly because I really don't have hair, so. Rukia, can I see the model view? Sure. There's really nothing specific in the model. We just have one singular table and the data dictionary here. In this case, we just added the table itself. We didn't create any dimensional tables on top of it. And yeah, one thing that Leon already just posted in the chat, please guys, I beg you, I really beg you, please submit the feedback forms. It's not going to take a lot of time. It's 1 or 2 minutes, that's it. But we want to understand what we can change about these sessions. Is there anything specific that you want us to go through? Is there any other dimension that you want us to look into? How did you like it? Did you not like it? And these sort of things. We just want to understand if we're in the right direction, because we're also learning things, right? We're not perfect in no way, shape, or form. So we're still learning and trying to understand how can we improve upon our process to make everything and the whole experience more pleasant for you guys. And for those of you who want to, yeah, one thing I forgot to mention, getting hasty, forgot it, is you do have the opportunity to actually book individual consultations with me as well. There's a link in the chat right now that you can use, and you can book a session. We can just chat about the dataset itself. We can talk about the visuals, about specific formatting options, or anything that's related to these sort of contests and the datasets within them. So feel free to use that link. There's no obligations. It's free of charge. So just go ahead and use it. All right. If there's nothing else, well, from my side, what I can say is thank you for attending. I hope it was interesting and you managed to learn something new and let's say, insightful. Other than that, don't forget that we have a second session, I think in a week's time or 2 weeks' time. Just check the webinar listings. Let's actually double check whilst we have the time. Resources, webinars. This one's right here. Oh, we actually have one for this. Okay, my apologies. But yeah, you do have the opportunity to go for the individual consultations. And don't forget about the webinars at ZoomCharts.com email, where you can send in all your questions and we can talk about the specifics of it. All right. Other than that, thanks for your attention, guys, and have a great rest of the day. Bye.